Welcome to First Congregational Church in Guilford, Connecticut, where we say whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Fall is coming quickly, and you might hear it in all of our voices today. However, it's beautiful and it's great. I'm so grateful to be outside. On this particular Sunday, the New Haven East Con Association has a period of time in which we exchange pulpits. So today you'll be hearing from Reverend Todd Vetter, who is the co-pastor at First Congregational Church in Madison. And our own associate pastor, Reverend Reilly Paige, will be preaching in Madison. This morning, this is the text with which we will be hearing and reflecting. It's from the book of Exodus, chapter 17. The whole Israelite community set forth from the desert of Sin, traveling from the place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled more against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Holy One, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." God answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the leaders of Israel. May we all, in our desperation, call out to God and trust that God will be with us today. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Vetter. I'm one of the senior ministers at the First Congregational Church of Madison, United Church of Christ. And I bring you greetings from all of the membership and the friends of our church, and our gratitude for this opportunity to share a word or two with you and participate in the New Haven East Con Association's annual pulpit exchange. We are delighted to be welcoming Reilly to our pulpit this morning and to hear a word from her as well. I wanted to begin just a reflection on this passage that you have heard from the book of Exodus, this story of the people's progress, the early stages of that progress through the wilderness. They have come through the Red Sea, of course, and witnessed that miraculous power that God seems to have to liberate us from all manner of bondage. And now they have come to this moment of crisis. They've been moving from stage to stage, from oasis to oasis, I would imagine, through the wilderness, and now they have come to this place where the water seems to have run out. And in that moment, they are seized with perhaps understandable fear and anxiety, and they turn, of course, as so many of us will do in moments like this, to the comfort of nostalgia, of looking back at their old lives and thinking, if only we remained in Egypt, there was food to eat and there was water to drink. And they turn to Moses and they ask him, "Why have you brought us out here to die, to perish in the wilderness?" And Moses is, of course, still sort of wrestling with what it means to be the leader of this people as they walk through the wilderness. And he does not seem to have an answer, so like all great leaders, he looks beyond himself and thinks to himself, what resource is there? What other authority can I turn to? And of course, Moses being Moses, he turns to God and he says, "What am I going to do with this people? They're about ready to stone me." And God says very simply, pass before the people, almost like a gauntlet. Take some of the elders of the people with you, and take your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will be standing there in front of you upon the mountain at Horeb. Strike the mountain, and water will pour out of it, so that the people may drink. And all of this happens. Streams of water pour out of the rock. The people drink, and then they proceed on their way. continue on their way through the wilderness. I love this story principally because it happens in the wilderness. And I think that no matter what stage of life we are in, no matter where we find ourselves, wilderness is such an incredibly powerful and always relevant metaphor for the lives we lead as human beings and as human societies. We always find ourselves in some form of wilderness or another. Collectively, globally, at this point, we have come through the wilderness of COVID, right? That great spiritual and political and cultural crisis that has left us all a little bit bereft and certainly understandably nostalgic for something better. And now that COVID seems to be raising its ugly head again, many of us fear or worry that we are returning to that place of uncertainty and illness, right, where our very breath seems to be at risk. So I think for those reasons and for all manner of reasons, this story from Exodus is deeply important to us. Because on the simplest level, right, it is a story of reassurance, right, that in those moments when we are thirsting physically or metaphorically or spiritually, God provides. This reinforces our sense that God is somehow providential and provisional, right? That God will give what our needs require. Sort of, right? I think of this story frequently when I remember what I can remember of my childhood. When I was a child, my family lived overseas a great deal, and we spent 6 years in what was then East Pakistan, what is now the country of Bangladesh. And being North Americans living in what was then thought of as a developing world, we lived with a great deal of privilege. And I can remember at the back of our property, there was a white wall, and on the other side of the wall was basically an alley that served as our compost pile. What we didn't eat, what we didn't need, we would simply throw over the wall into the compost. And I remember I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I got up the stairs and I was looking over the wall into this alley, and I noticed that there was a man there, and he was digging the trash, and I seemed to have an image of rags, and I do not for a moment imagine that my 4-year-old mind was capable of understanding the grave injustice and evil of this situation of this man digging through what amounted to our trash to survive, and me standing on the wall looking down at him. But even so, the image has stayed with me. And it's always raised this question, right, that finds some expression in this story: is God among us or not? Because it's very obvious when we are faced with grave images of injustice, unfairness, inequality, right? When we confront homophobia and racism, right? Even in our own homes, our own backyards, our own neighborhoods and communities, we can ask ourselves, is God with us or not? And it is a perfectly understandable question. Because we want to believe that there is some power, some authority beyond ourselves that governs the relations among us, right? And it points us towards a sense of something better, something that is closer to an essential good, something that is just, something that promises peace, something that might even engender a sense of joy among us, that things have gotten better. So this story, I think, does that, right? Maybe not these 7 short verses about people grumbling because they're running out of water, but the larger Exodus narrative, this story of that begins in bondage, right? That begins with a people who have been enslaved for centuries, whose whole life is measured in this cycle of labor, grinding, purposeless labor. Every day the same, every week the same, every month the same, every year the same, every generation the same. Imagine what that does to someone's imagination, right? If we are caught in that cycle, and you don't have to be an 11th century Israelite in Egypt to understand this, because it happens to all of us so often. We get caught in this sort of cycle of living, and we cannot see past what the next day demands of us. So this longer narrative of the Exodus liberates us from that. The political philosopher Michael Walzer has a book that is wonderful on this called Exodus and Revolution. And in it, he talks about the social transformation of Israel in the wilderness, right? That's what's going on in this story. That this cyclical life of enslavement and bondage gives way. After the crossing of the Red Sea, after years of refinement in the wilderness, gives way to a people who begin to see the world, their lives, history at large, as linear, as stretching out, and as governed by a just and generous and providential God. So you can live into that world a whole lot better and a whole lot more faithful if you know that there is a progress, that we are part of a journey towards some ultimate expression of good. Right? We can deal, I think, with more equanimity and perhaps even more constructively with those inevitable moments along the way when evil and injustice will rise in front of us, if we know that history is governed by a God who seeks justice and peace first. We can meet those calamities that come to us, whether they're individual or systemic. We can meet those calamities with faith and with courage and resolve if we, like the Israelites, can move from thinking of life as merely a repetitive cycle to a line that is stretched out, that is governed by God, a history of which we are called to be covenant partners, moving towards some ultimate fulfillment of a divine resolve. The Exodus story has always done that for me. It has always been both hopeful, reassuring, but also in a deeply important way, prophetic. And here's what I think is important with respect to the notion of what it means to be prophetic. It does not simply mean being political in the sense of advocating for one thing or another. It means to be invested with a sense of hope that everything we do, if we do it faithfully and with required courage and resolve, will meet the impulse of God and will hasten the day of ultimate good. Exodus, this story, the larger narrative, the prophetic books that follow it, they do not articulate a future that is completely unburdened by sorrow or loss or injustice or evil. They are first and foremost bearers of reality. The great stories of the Hebrew tradition hold reality out to us because we cannot escape it. We cannot long for some bygone day that was better than the day that we are living now. We know in our hearts that those days never existed. No matter how much we might long for an imagined past in which everyone was happy and prosperous, it simply is never so. As people of faith, the future is where our energies lie. To bind up the wounds of the present and to live into this hope that God has something more in store for us. And I think the wilderness is an important part of this. To acknowledge both the trials of the wilderness, those times when we hunger and we thirst, and we're not entirely sure where our next steps will lead, but also the more constructive parts of a wilderness progress. What it means to live with awe and wonderment and how deeply important those things are to us. There was a study years ago at the University of California in Berkeley that actually studied the positive effects of awe and wonder. If we go out and we find those places that transport us, that trigger imaginative flights within us, right? We become healthier. Our physical health is improved by that experience. Our mental and spiritual health is vastly improved by being acquainted with awe and wonder. Our capacity to be patient with the lives of others expands as a result of an experience of awe. We are simply more human in those moments when we are confronted with something transcendent, something that is greater than ourselves, something that invites our vision, our imagination to see to the very edge of the landscape and know that there is something beyond it. These are the things that enhance everything that is best within us, everything that is most human, everything that is nurturing, everything that promises the greatest flights of human flourishing. Now, I believe this with my whole heart because I have been captivated by the power of physical wilderness. We are fortunate enough, our family, to have spent about 9 summers at this jewel of a place in western Wyoming called Ring Lake Ranch. If you are not familiar with it, I cannot recommend it enough. It is a retreat center that was founded by an Episcopal priest about 50 years ago as a place of retreat in sacred wilderness, a place to find restoration and rest and renewal. And it is all of those things and so much more. It sits nestled on the edge of a small glacial lake, and rising above it are the Wind River Mountains. Some rising as high as 10 or 11,000 feet. The views are magnificent. The stars at night are so bright you can almost imagine reading by them. And that sense of awe and wonderment takes you out of yourself, reduces those problems that in our daily lives can seem insurmountable, reduces them to a point where you can see them in proportion, in appropriate perspective. It is the power of awe that can transform us, that can acquaint us with a new sense of hopefulness, that we are part of something greater beyond ourselves. Again, the experience of witnessing the transcendent is so deeply important to who we are as people of faith. This story comes to an end with an interesting question, right? Is God among us or not? And Exodus is a great story, and all great storytellers do not answer the question for us. They leave the question unanswered, because the great purpose of a story is to encourage us, not simply to answer the question yes or no, the simple question, of course, for the people on that wilderness progress millennia ago was yes, God is with them. But the eternal question for us, is God among us, is simply answered by the choices we make, the decisions we make, our posture and our orientation to the world around us and to the future that demands of us resolve, courage, faith, and hope. So thank you again, my brothers and sisters, for listening for a few moments. I commend the wonders of awe to each of you. And I hope that in those moments when you are awestruck, you find an encounter within that wonderment of the God who will always continue to lead us forward and provide us a future filled with hope. Thanks be to God. Amen.